Okay, sweet. So, welcome. Today's agenda, we're going to be talking about just an overview of the template creation process. We'll then be giving you a detailed description of the template files that come together to create our pages on staging. And then I'm going to walk you through the steps for how to create a new page template from an existing PCF that may already exist on your staging server. And then we'll, of course, be doing all of that as a live demonstration in OU Campus. And we'll end with a final Q&A if you have any more questions. But of course, if you've attended these before, you know that I like to also answer quite a few questions as we're going along throughout everything else. So just a quick overview of the PCF transformation process. You know that on the staging server, you have your PCF files, and then when those are combined with an XSL file and you publish them on the production site, you have your full production web page, .html, .aspx, whatever you want there. Essentially, your PCF file combines with the XSL to give you this. But the real biggest question that we always have is, where did those PCF files come from? If you've never worked in OU Campus before, you know that PCF file extension is unique to us. So, you know, how do we actually get those? They don't just appear out of nowhere, of course. So here's how we get a PCF from an end user's perspective. So you've logged in, you're in the Pages List view of OU Campus, you click the New button in the Pages List view. It's going to give you a list of templates you can choose from in this little New Content dialog box. And then when you click on one of those, it gives you this nice little wizard where you just fill in some basic information. Then you click Create, and then you get a training page, or an interior page, or whatever sort of page that you wanted, depending on whatever template you used. So from an end user's perspective, it's just a couple steps. It's pretty easy. Now let's talk about what that looks like from the back side of it, the behind-the-scenes files that come and actually make that a reality. So first of all, once again, you still have that New button, and when you click on your image thumbnail, which is literally just an image, what it does is it opens up that wizard, which we looked at before. That wizard is actually created through a file called a TCF, which we'll explain in a second. When you enter in that information in your TCF file, or your wizard from an end user's perspective, it's going to take all of that data that you entered in those fields and send that data to what's called a TMPL file. And the TMPL file, in conjunction with whatever XSL file that it's linked with, then combine to create your PCF file on the staging server. And you also might have templates in the templates that will create not only a single PCF, but also maybe an include file and some other things along those lines, even with just one single wizard. What's cool is that you can link in multiple TMPLs, link those with multiple XSLs, and so you can get multiple files when you create one wizard, or when you finish the completion of one single wizard. So that's kind of the behind-the-scenes files. So you have an image file, you have a TCF file, and a TMPL, all of which combine to give you that PCF that you might be a little more familiar with. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about those file types that I've been mentioning. I'm giving you all these acronyms, and of course I'm going to explain what those acronyms mean. So the first thing I want to talk about are XSLs. This is something that we won't be discussing too much in our live demo today, so I just want to make sure we all have kind of a base understanding of what they mean. XSLs, they stand for Extensible Style Sheet Language. That's what the acronym stands for. Essentially what these files do is that it applies styling to the page and also controls things like layout, and it's also where you're importing in your CSS and your scripts and stuff like that to get all those working. And what it essentially does is when you publish a PCF file, it will convert the PCF file on staging into a kind of normal web page file, HTML, PHP, ASPX, JSP, that sort of stuff. So you actually have a file that does something that browsers can understand on the production server. Now when it comes to template files, these are the files that OU Campus uses on the staging server to create your new page section templates. So there's three components, as I've sort of talked about. The TCF, which stands for Template Control File, is the form for creating a new page or section. This is the information that you're filling out in that wizard right after you click that new template file. Then you also have a TMPL, and this stands for just template. And this is the actual kind of template where it's a file that's essentially filled with generic information, just kind of like general layout stuff and things along those lines, and it's waiting to have some specific data put into it from the TCF in order for it to actually become something that's specific as opposed to just this kind of generic page layout. And then, of course, you have some sort of image file, GIF, JPEG, PNG, BMP, whatever, that matches the same file name as the TCF's file name. And those two are linked together, and that just gives you the image that you click when you click that new button. So it's really more of just kind of a reference, but you can make that image look essentially like what that template's going to create, so your users can have a bit of an understanding there. Let's also talk languages. So I mean, I've just given you 4 different file types essentially, and 3 of those you might not be super familiar with. So you might be wondering, what languages are those written in? Well, luckily, all the template files that we've talked about, including also PCFs, use XML. They're all essentially XML files, and as such use that syntax. XSL is a little bit different because it's essentially its own language, but it's an offshoot of XML, so they're all kind of based in the root of XML. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It's similar to HTML. They're kind of analogous, but what's cool about XML is that the elements are not predefined. So, in HTML, you have a p tag, and that p tag means create a paragraph. In XML, you can have a little bit more freedom in terms of defining your tags to mean what you want them to mean, as opposed to having them have a central definition. One thing that's also unique about XML is that it adheres to, well, not unique, I guess, but one thing that's important to know about XML is that it adheres to a really strict structure and syntax. So if things aren't written exactly right, the parser, which interprets the XML file, won't know what to do with it. So it's always important when we're talking about templates and things along those lines to make sure they're written exactly as they're supposed to, because even one errant space or a quotation mark in the wrong area is going to break your entire file. And something else that's unique to XML is that files will require a root element, which will essentially, it's essentially the parent of everything else in your entire file. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get into the demo here. XSL stands for Extensible Style Sheet Language. It takes XML data and transforms it or styles it into something more advanced. In OU Campus's case, it transforms it to a styled web page, which will then, create a functional web page on your production server. And it still uses all the same XML formatting and structure that we just talked about before. So it's also very strictly structured. And also, if you know these things already, great. This is just, I guess, a review, but we want to also just talk about some terminology that I'll be using in this training a lot. There are 2 concepts called elements and tags when we talk about source code and XML specifically that are important to know about. So a tag is any XML, piece of XML that begins with like that left caret symbol and then ends with a right caret symbol, or less than and greater than. And usually they also have a separate end tag that kind of denote the end of that particular tag, although some tags can do what's called self-closing, which means you don't need that end tag. When we talk about an element is kind of a full expression. It is not only your beginning tag, but it is also the content in the middle of it, and then the ending tag, so it wraps it all together saying, okay, this is one big package deal that corresponds to like one specific function. If you have an XML tag that's self-closing, then the element will just simply be that tag and whatever things you have inside of it, and then the self-closing tag, and then it's done. So there's no content and there's no end tag. It's just that single self-closing tag. There's also a term called an attribute, and an attribute is essentially just a configurable property that is within that tag. So before, after the less than symbol and before the first greater than symbol. And the syntax is always, you're going to have your attribute name, and then an equals sign, and then quotation marks, and then the value of that attribute. So, you have whatever property you're adjusting, and then what that property's value actually is, end quote, and that's an attribute. So as a quick example, I've got this screenshot here of just a couple lines of a PCF file. If you go up to look at line 70, we've got this OUC:div, and you see that entire line starts with a less than symbol, ends with a greater than symbol. That's an opening tag for what's called an OUC:div element. And if we look down to line 73, you have the less than symbol, then a slash, and then the same name as we saw up here, and then the greater than symbol. That is the end tag for the HTML, or I mean for the OUC:div element. So everything inside of it, lines 70 through 73, that is the entire OUC:div element. And elements can nest and things like that, so we can see that we have some other things like a p tag, an ending p tag. So there's a paragraph element on line 72 that's inside of the div element. And then also you have some attributes. So this label equals main content, group equals everyone. Those are attributes of the OUC:div tag, of the OUC:div element. Tag element, in that case, that's kind of interchangeable. And then the final example, line 71, OUC:editor, you'll see that it's got an attribute here called CSS menu, but then there's a slash and then the greater than symbol. That's an example of a self-closing tag. So as you can see, there's nothing else that says OUC:editor anywhere else because everything that's on line 72 is the full expression of OUC:editor. So if you knew that already, hopefully that's a nice little review. But if you didn't, you can at least say you learned something today about about XML and markup languages in general, including HTML, because most of these same principles apply to HTML as well. So now let's talk specifically about some of the template files and just the stuff on staging that you're going to see. So as we said, the PCF is what essentially is your web page on the staging server. It stands for a publish control file, and it's essentially, the end result of everything else that we're going to talk about today. It is the extension for our web pages on the staging server, so regardless of what you need on your production server for your production server to serve up the pages, be that HTML, PHP, ASPX, you're always still going to have PCF on the staging server. It contains what are called style sheet declarations, which essentially says, like, this is the XSL file I want to use to style my web page, and that PCF style sheet declaration also controls what the extension is of the published page on the production server. So you just have a little attribute that says, hey, what extension am I giving this page when I publish it? And whatever extension you write there becomes the extension on the production server. It also contains, all the stuff that you'd probably be used to if you've ever looked in the source code of a PCF file. It's got your page parameters, it's got your editable regions, it's got all of your WYSIWYG editor parameters, and if you're using multi-edit, it's all there. So all of that sort of stuff is within our PCF file. Next, we can talk about the TMPL file. And the TMPL file is actually very, very similar to a PCF. It's structured the same, and it contains all of the same tagging that I just talked about here in that previous slide. I always like to think of a TMPL as a generic PCF. It is a PCF in waiting. It's just waiting for a couple pieces of specific information that will turn the general page layout into an actual page that you can then start editing after you've given it those specific pieces of data, like the page title and the description and the file name and stuff like that. A TMPL file, the only difference between, just a general PCF and a TMPL is that it contains what are called echo directives, and essentially these echo directives allow for data from that new page wizard to actually be added to the right places on the TMPL file so it can then become a PCF. And then finally, the TCF stands for Template Control File. It is also known as a new page wizard. If you've ever filled out one of these, you have entered data into a TCF. And what's cool about these is that it essentially allows you to have your users enter information into this file, which then gets sent to the TMPL to create our specific PCF file. And it contains some 4 main sections. We'll see this when we look at it in just a couple minutes. It has a variable list, which essentially is where you're going to put all the questions that you want to ask in the form. It has a directory list, and this is optional. This is only if you're creating a new section template, which will create a new folder and some new files. A template list, this is where you define where or what TMPL file the data is getting sent to, and then a navigation list if you want to have new pages automatically be added to a side navigation or something along those lines. That's what that section does. And what's cool is you can have a single TCF file make multiple files at once. All you need to do is link more than one TMPL file to the TCF, and then as soon as you complete that new page wizard, it will make that many files. So however many TMPLs you have linked into that TCF file, that is how many files you're going to end up creating when you finish the new page wizard. And then finally, lest I forget, you have your image file, and essentially this image file just acts as the thumbnail when you click the new button. It has to have the same file name as the TCF, except obviously a different extension. And OU Campus just associates the two automatically, so that's really nice. You don't have to worry about that. It's just essentially make it look pretty. So now let's kind of put all these steps together. I've talked about kind of the details of these four files. So here's what we're going to be doing in our live demo today. We're going to essentially be creating a new page template from an existing PCF file in our site. And this is something that you guys all are able to do for your institutions as well. If you want to create a new page template, what you can do is you can essentially start from an existing PCF file on your staging server and turn that into a a template. What you could also do is you could take essentially a raw HTML file and turn that into a PCF and then turn that into a template. That takes a lot longer. That's essentially what the implementation department does when you guys sign a contract and become a customer and give or do a redesign or something like that. That's essentially what an implementation is, taking HTML and turning it into templates. But obviously that takes a lot of time. It involves XSL, and I don't have enough time in a Training Tuesday to do that. So we're just going to do the slightly faster one. So step one, we're going to use an existing PCF as a model to build out our TMPL file. We're going to create a new TCF that gathers the desired info we want. Then we're going to associate the TMPL and the TCF together so they're linked up. And then we're going to add echo directives to the TMPL so we can grab the data from the TCF specifically and put it where we want it to go. Finally, we'll upload an image, and then we'll test it out. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm here in my sandbox. I'm just going to go into the pages list view here. And I've got this just general training page, just made out of a standard interior page here. And this is just a standard PCF, nothing too special about it, aside from the fact that the internet's a little slow right now. So, I've got a page, it's got editable regions, all that sort of standard stuff. And Jessica, really quickly, you were asking if the slides will be available after today. Absolutely. I save PDFs of the slides, and I put it on the OCN as well as on the support site right next to the link for the recording. So yes, you will have the slides totally available for all time on our support site and on the OCN. Going back to what I'm doing here is I'm just entering into the source code of this PCF file. And as you can see, if you've ever been in a source code before for a PCF, we've got all of our properties here. We've got our editable regions. This is just a normal page, pretty standard stuff. If you go up here, these little things on lines 2 and 3 are our PCF style sheets where we're saying what XSL file is being used to style the page. So there we go. All of this is right here. What I want to do is I'm going to take this page and turn it into a TMPL file. And the way that I do that is simply by saving it as a TMPL. So what I'm going to do is click Save As, and I'm going to, instead of putting it inside my standard directory that's right off the root, I'm going to put it in my templates folder in my resources. So I'll go to _resources, OU, templates. This is typically where templates are stored, although it could be different depending on your implementation. And then I'm just going to go into interior for right now. And so what I'm going to just go and do is just rename it because, like I said, they're both XML files and the TMPL is pretty much just a PCF. So we can rename it and nothing's going to break. So I'm just going to call it Training Tuesdays.tmpl. We're going to click Save. So our original training page, that never got adjusted or anything. It's still there back in my training directory. I just saved a copy of this file, essentially, in a new directory and with a new file extension. So trainingtuesdays.tmpl, we're right here. If I click Preview, OU Campus interprets TMPL files as simply source code files as opposed to an actual web page. So you won't see a preview, but that's fine. We don't need it. What we can do is then go into source, and now we have a fully specific page. You know, it still has a title that's called training page. It's got, you know, well, it doesn't have any description, but it could have a description. It's got content in here. So all of these things we don't want to exist in our generic file, because then every time I use this file to create a new PCF, it's going to have those things, the training page, the content and the body, all of those things we don't want. So all we need to do is we're going to go and delete them. So first of all, I'm just going to go through some of these parameters, and I'm going to just get rid of any of the content that's inside my parameter elements. So we got there. Over here, we have some options to turn left and right columns on and off. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to delete the options that are inside of it, because we're also going to, in our template, we're going to allow users to choose whether they want to turn the columns on and off right when they're creating the page. So instead of having that predefined, I'm also going to leave that up to the users when they make a new page. So I'll delete the options in left enable right here. And I'm going to delete the options that are inside right enable as well. But make sure that I'm keeping the parameter element itself, this part right here, completely intact. I don't want to accidentally delete the end tag or anything along those lines, because that will actually cause me a problem. Scrolling down here, I'm going to delete the title of the page and its metadata, and if I had the description, I would also delete whatever was in the content attribute of the description. But there's nothing there, so that's great. And then finally, what I also want to do is I'm going to be deleting this content inside the main body. So instead of having every page I make have this starter content in here, I'm going to go ahead and leave that region blank, because I'm actually going to give our users the ability to put some starter body content in the page right when they're creating it. Although I could just leave it totally blank and then people could work on it once they've created the page too. That's kind of an issue of just personal preference. All right, so at this point I have essentially deleted everything that's specific that was about my specific PCF before. Now I've made this file generic, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. And now we just have our generic TMPL file that's almost ready to go. So at this point, we'll be actually revisiting it later. But for right now, this is where we'll stay. We'll come back to this when we add our echo directives later on. So now, we are in step 3, which is, or maybe it's step 2, I don't remember. Either way, we're on to our next step. And our next step is going to be to create a TCF file. The easiest way to do this, if you're kind of doing it like I am, is simply just to take an existing TCF and then copy it and then rename it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this interior.tcf file and just copy it. We'll just give it a copy right here. It's going to be interior-1.tcf, but I'm going to rename it to Training Tuesdays just for the sake of easy reference and understanding here. So it'll finish that there. Awesome. Now if I refresh the page, it'll sort it back to where it should be, right next to my TMPL. So now I've got this TCF and my TMPL right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this TCF, and since I copied it from one that already existed, I'm actually just going to delete everything pretty much inside of this, so we can just start from scratch and understand what we're doing in each one of these little sections. I'm going to keep a couple things, just because those take a little bit more time to do, and I want to make sure that I'm respecting everyone's time here. But essentially, you know, this is basically almost as bare bones as you can get with a TCF. So As you can see, a TCF file is once again still an XML file. That's why you've got this version declaration up here. And you have this little tag here that's called TCF. And you can notice that there's the end tag all the way at the bottom. This is what I mean when I'm talking about a root node. Everything that's inside that makes up our TCF is contained within this kind of original initial tag. So, obviously we have other tags that are inside of it, like title, variable list, variable name, variable, all that sort of stuff. But it has to be within this original one. So that's what a root node is. It just is the ultimate parent of everything else that exists in your site. And so as we can go in here, you'll be reminded that there are kind of 4 main sections, but I only have 3. I have variable list, I have template list, and I have navigation list. The reason why I don't have directory list is because I'm not creating a directory when I want to make this new page. All I'm doing is a new PCF file. I'm not making directories as well, which is why directory list doesn't exist. Scott Nauer has a question. He's asking, how important is syntax, particularly line tabs at this phase? Scott, my advice would just be, when it comes to line tabs and everything, don't worry about it too much. Whatever kind of works well for you is what I would suggest. I'm a big fan of having a lot of space between my elements, which is why I've got like double line breaks between title and variable list. The XML parser isn't going to worry about that. The only thing that it really cares about is, making sure that you're tagging everything appropriately, not doing something like this where you try to have a tag within another tag in that way, because obviously that's going to cause problems. So syntax is important with regards to making sure that the tags and the elements themselves are ordered correctly and nested and all that. But the fact that I have a bunch of line breaks and a bunch of tabs, that's more just personal preference. And Shelly, she's asking if I can make the source code bigger. It's difficult to see. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the suggestion. Here, let me just increase the size here. Hopefully that's a little easier for people to see over in internet land. Let's go ahead and just start building out our TCF at this point. So the first thing that we want to do with our TCF is we're just going to give it a name, and that's what this little title node is here for. So we can just name this whatever we want. This is just going to have a friendly name, so I'm just going to call it Training Tuesday Template. And this can be whatever you want. It's totally up to you. Inside, or after the title node, we have variable list. And as I said before, variable list is simply just the container where all of our questions are going to go. So if I really quickly kind of open up a new tab really quickly, if I'm just in some random directory, I click a new button and I open up a template right here. So each one of these questions, page title, description, file name, add navigation item, all of those are going to be variables inside our variable list right here. So as we can see, I have one that I've already filled out called auto navigation. Don't worry about this one for too much. But what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to just start building out my TCF, start asking the questions that I want to ask. So the way to do that is by creating a whole bunch of variable elements. So I'm just going to kind of have this one right here. I'm going to hand type this one out. I have some others that are just copied and pasted to make things a little bit easier for time's sake. But my first variable is I want to ask for the page title, for metadata, and also to put it in the page heading. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding attributes to this variable tag. So the first thing I can do is I'm going to ask for the variable name. This is one of the mandatory attributes that are in the TCF. We have full documentation for which attributes exist and are valid, and also which ones are required on our support site. So if you want to know more about this, absolutely go there. That's going to be a good reference for you there. But I'll just kind of explain things as I keep going. So the name is just going to give this some sort of unique label, which we will be then referencing later on when we start adding those echo directives into our TMPL file. And also you can use that in other places in the same TCF file as well, so it's pretty neat. So I'm just going to give this a unique label, and this variable, as I said, is going to be my my page title. So I'm just going to call it title. Pretty easy there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to determine the type of variable that I'm using. We have a bunch of different options. As we can see, you've got drop-down menus, you've got big text fields, you've got single-line text fields. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can determine what this element is going to look like in the folder, in the kind of the final product. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to give it a type attribute, and I'm going to call it text. And that's going to create a single line text field, really standard. This is actually the default value. If you omitted the type attribute altogether, it would just by default make it a single line text field. Next, I'm going to ask for the prompt. And the prompt is what the users see as the label for that particular element in the new page wizard. So, for this variable right here, page title would have been the prompt, for example. So in this case, I'm going to just say in my prompt, page title. And then I can also add alt text, which is going to be helper text. So for this element, going back here, the stuff that we see all down here is going to be the alt text. So this is just helper text to help our users understand a little bit more about what this variable is supposed to do. So I'll just do this. Add the title of your page. This field is required. One thing that you unfortunately can't do in variables is you can't mark them as explicitly required from inside the TCF, but even if you mark it something like put it in the alt text, or if you put it in the prompt, you'd be surprised at how much of a difference that makes when it comes to making your users actually put data in there instead of just leaving it blank when they make a new page. So I've got my first variable here done. It has a name, a type, a prompt, an alt, and that's all I need. You might be wondering why I am having this completely be blank. What I could do is I could actually give it some default text. So if I said, title goes here, as soon as I'm, actually creating this and, clicking my new page wizard, I would have text that's pre-filled into my field if I added it here in the TCF. If I wanted it to be blank, like I have it in this example right here, then I just simply have no text between the opening and closing variable tags in the TCF file. So we finished our first element. Now I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste some more variables, and I'll explain them as I copy and paste them in. So my next variable is I want to ask for the description of the page, just once again kind of collecting some metadata here. So I'm going to paste this in here. And what this one is it is the variable name equals description. It's also a text field, but this time I have this additional attribute called rows equal 3. And what rows equal 3 does is it just determines how many rows of text tall the text box is. So if you leave it blank, it's rows equals 1, and it's a single line text field. But if I have rows equal 3, then it's a 3-line text large. And that's going to create something that looks like what we have here in the description. So it's a little bit larger, a little bit taller. We have a prompt and an alt. Enter a short description of the page to be displayed by search engines. Awesome. Once again, I'm leaving this value, the value of the variable element blank because I'm just going to have that text box be blank when users create the new field. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to give our users the ability to add some body text right when they're creating the page. So the way that I can do that is I'm going to make another element. And this one, its name is body. It's also type equals text. This one has 5 rows tall instead of 3. And I've got another optional attribute here called editor, and this says editor equals yes. And what that's doing is it's simply appending a mini WYSIWYG editor to this field. So instead of just simply a description field where I can start adding text, it's going to actually give me a mini WYSIWYG so I can start styling stuff. And we've got a prompt and we've got an alt. Once again, leave it blank so users don't have starter text in the field when they click the new template. And now we've got two more, and I'm going to copy and paste both of those in at the same time. What we've got going on here, so let me just tab those accordingly here. Just for ease of use, I'm going to just make some more line breaks here. Once again, line breaks are completely, doesn't matter. The parser is just going to take out all of them anyways when it parses it. So this is just kind of making it nice and legible for me, especially because I'm doing a recording. I want to make sure there's a lot of space so you guys can read it later on. So these next two variables, I've got one right here and another right here. And you notice that they have the name of left call and right call. And they have a different type. Instead of text, it's select. And the value of select in the type attribute gives us a drop-down menu. And what it's doing is also it's outputting XML data because we've got some nodes that are inside of it, you know, these two option nodes, which is why we have to specify it being output as XML as opposed to just being plain text. But essentially what we're doing is we're just allowing for those left and right columns to be turned off and on when we create our page. So instead of having one of those columns turned on, just fixed by default, now we have our users giving them the ability to kind of adjust the beginning layout of what their page is going to look like, instead of having to create it and then go into page properties later and then turn it on and off from there. So we're saving them a step. And we can just do this. What it's doing is essentially we're giving our users two options. We can have the left column on or off. The option tags, or the option elements essentially, this is where you're actually just saying, you know, what's the value, which then gets kind of passed back to the XML and the XSL. So this, you know, we don't need to worry about this for our Training Tuesday right here. But then whatever is selected equals true, is going to be whatever shows up by default first. So if I go back to my example and I have this add navigation item, and you'll see that yes is the one that's showing up by default, that means that the option node that's inside the navigation variable, the one that displays yes, is the one that has the selected equals true attribute in the TCF. And actually, we can just look that right here. Option value equals true, yes, and that one's going to be the one that shows up by default. So the selected attribute is actually optional. You could omit it, and it would just be the first option of the list that gets displayed first. So same thing for right column, except now we're just doing it for the right column instead of the left, so don't need to explain that again. At this point, we haven't actually added the ability for users to add a file name yet, so obviously that's very important. So our final variable that we're doing is going to be the file name for our new PCF file that we're creating. So let me just tab right there. So this one, what I'm doing is I have this extra attribute here that's called section. And this is essentially just more of another visual thing to help your users out. Whatever shows up in the section attribute is going to be this. It's going to add a line break before that element, and then, you know, put it nice in kind of a little heading with a little horizontal rule, and then you'll have that element there. So in this example, I have two sections. I have general page setup and then file configuration. And the general page setup one is being defined as an attribute within my page title. And the file configuration one is defined as an attribute within my file name variable. So if we go back here, I'm asking for the file name, and this little thing that says file configuration is going to show up right above that in the new page wizard when everything's all said and done. If I wanted to, I could actually go up here and make a section attribute for my title too. And I could just say, boop. So there we go. Now I have two sections. This one is going to say general setup, and then the one underneath is going to say file configuration. So here, we've got the name, PCF-file name. We're prompting for the file name and then an alt right there. And this one we actually do have some default text. This one just says new file, and that's just going to be what appears inside my file name attribute right there. And that'll be pre-filled as soon as I click the new template. You'll notice that I don't have the type attribute in this one. Once again, this is optional, and since I've omitted this attribute, it's going to default to a single line text field. So we're good in that respect, because that's all we need for an actual file name. So at this point, I've asked all the questions that I need to ask, or that I want to ask, for my variable list. Now I'm going to move down into the template list. And this is where I'm going to be telling OU Campus, like, okay, I'm collecting all this data in my TCF. Where am I going to send this data to? Like, what file is this data going to eventually be sent? So what I do is I define that within the template elements right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give the file name of where I want this data to go. And we know that it's going to go to the Training Tuesday. If I can spell Tuesday right, .tmpl. So now we're saying, all right, all the data that we're collecting will eventually be going to the trainingtuesday.tmpl file that's in the same directory as our TCF. But since it's in OU/templates, everything inside of there is going to work, so that's all good. So what we also need to do is we actually have to add some more attributes into the template tag itself. And these attributes are important because this is what allows the file name to be passed to the TMPL and some other information, such as when you create the page, do you want to be taken directly to the page, or do you just want to be taken back to the folder in which that new page was created? Other things along those lines. So what I'm going to do, and this is just a best practice that I've inherited from some of the developers on our team. You don't need to do this. You could just very easily add attributes like we've been doing before. But since there's quite a few attributes that we add to the template node, I typically just create them as their own, separate line. Even though I'm still within the tag, as you can see, I'm to the left of the greater than symbol, signifying that the tag is done. I just do this because it, once again, is just a personal preference to make things a little more legible and understandable for me. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to add the file name attribute. And what this attribute does is this is what's actually going to say, all right, you've got this trainingtuesday.tmpl file. Obviously, we don't want it to be called trainingtuesday.tmpl when we actually create it, so what's its file name going to be? If you remember, we have a file name variable up here that's asking for what the file name is going to be right here. So the way that we can essentially call the value that the user adds in this question right here and pass it into our trainingtuesday.tmpl is we're going to do curly brackets, which is just syntax for take the value of this variable, and then I'm going to enter in whatever I have inside the name. So in this case, it's going to be PCS-file name. So there we go. Now I'm going to take whatever the user enters in here and create the file that's going to have that file name. Next step is what extension is, oopsies, sorry, I did it after the quote marks. That's not good. Next step is what's the extension of this file going to be? Well, we already know that we are getting the, we already know that we're going to make a PCF file. We just need to tell the TCF that. So we're going to do extension equals PCF. So now what we've done is we've collected the file name, and there's no need for users to add the .pcf file extension, and we're automatically going to be appending .pcf to the end of it, thereby forcing users to create PCFs instead of accidentally, when they name the file, also deleting the file name, which then gives you a file with no extension, which of course doesn't work. And the last thing that we need to do is we also need to add the display file name extension, or attribute. And the reason that we need to do this is by default, TCFs, if I didn't have this variable right here that was asking for the file name, OU Campus will automatically create a field that asks for the file name. The disadvantage to that is that in the default one that OU Campus injects to every TCF, is what it's going to do is it's going to just give you the full file name complete with the extension. And that can cause problems because then sometimes users accidentally delete the file extension, causes issues. So that's essentially why we're doing display file name equals no, because then it's not going to give us that default file name field, and we're just going to grab that data from here and force it to have the extension of PCF there without having users potentially screwing that up. So our next one is we are going to do preferred redirect. And preferred redirect is just saying when I create my page, do I want to be taken automatically to the edit view of that page, or do I want to just be taken back to the directory in which my page was created? So since I want to create my page and launch right into start editing it, I'm going to say preferred redirect equals yes, which is going to take my users to the page directly. And then the final thing that we need to do is AutoNav. And AutoNav enables users to add a navigation item to the side navigation file that's in that same directory. You just need to also determine that here within the template declaration. So it essentially it's one step that needs to make this little add navigation item yes and no to get it to work. So I want to say AutoNav, and we also happen to have a variable that controls, hey, do we want to use AutoNav or do we not want to use AutoNav? So all we need to do is, once again, grab the bracket, which just says, give me the value of this variable. And I'm going to just take the variable name, put it right in there, and there we go. So now we're done. So what I've done now is I'm saying, hey, send all the data to the Training Tuesday, give it this file name, don't display the default file name option, and also redirect me to that page as soon as I create it, and whatever I've said before up here to say make a navigation item or not, then pass that data on through the list. The last part of the TCF, we don't need to do anything with this here. All we need to do is I want to just explain it really quick. This navigation list variable, not variable, sorry. The navigation list element and the two navigation elements that are inside of it, this is just simply another step in getting the auto navigation to work. What this is saying is if I have had the navigation turned to yes to create a new navigation item, then here's the name of the file in the same directory in which I'm going to be creating a link. And then it's just going to say add a link that's got the AutoNav short URL. This is a system-wide parameter, OX AutoNav right here, that I just am grabbing the variable of. Obviously, I don't have a variable in this that's called OX AutoNav short URL, but it can grab that from just the system level variables. And then finally, we are just going to create a link with the name of whatever I put here in my title. So once again, we're grabbing that value one more time and putting it here, and that's going to be the text that will actually be our navigation link. And if I have navigation equals false, then don't create anything. Simple as that. So now at this point, our TCF file is completely done. We're ready to go. So I'm going to click Save. And I'm going to go back out of that directory. And now I'm going to go back to my TMPL file. And what I'm doing now is I'm just going to be adding the echo directives to say, okay, well, I know all this data is being sent to my trainingtuesdays.tmpl file, but more specifically, where is that data going in the TMPL file? And it's pretty much just going to go where in all of the places where I deleted something beforehand. So say, for example, I'm asking for the page title. I want that page title to also become my page heading. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an echo directive in place of actual content inside of this parameter element. So what I'm going to do, the syntax for this is also very specific, one wrong space and it doesn't work. But you're going to start it off kind of like an HTML comment with less than, exclamation point, dash, dash. But this time, don't put a space, put a percentage sign, and then echo. And you'll see as soon as I add echo, it changes color. That means that OU Campus recognizes it as being something more than just a comment. Then we're going to put an attribute inside of it called var, which is just, hey, listen for a variable with a specific name, equals sign, quote marks, and then I'm going to say title, because we're going to be taking the value of my title variable from the TCF and putting it here. And then once I finish the quote marks, I'm going to do a space, dash, dash, greater than, there's my echo variable, or my echo directive that grabs data from that title variable. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it somewhere else. You also want the page title to show up in the metadata, in the actual page title that's used by search engines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to the title node in my PCF, or my TMPL, soon to become TCF, and I'm going to paste that once again. So it's going to take that information and put it at two different places, once in the metadata and also another place for the page heading. Now let's just kind of move on and continue to add in our echo directives. The next thing I didn't change any of these, but I did delete the left enable data, all of those option nodes inside, because once again, we're asking if those option we're asking our users to do that on page creation instead of having it fixed for them. So I'm going to just paste this in, and then instead of echo var title, I'm going to echo var left call, which is, where we had the information for the left column. Then I also have to add encoding equals none, because we're not just passing plain text down through this, we're passing in two option nodes for XML. And so encoding equals none just prevents them from being encoded again. Since we're already encoding the page at UTF-8, we don't need to re-encode it when it's being passed through as plain text. So that's why we have to do that. So left call equals encoding equals none. That's great. We're going to rinse and repeat for the right column, because we're also asking for that. And then I just need to change the variable name to correspond to what I've set for my right column. So we got right call right there. And then next we're going to add the description. We asked for that page description before, and the page description normally resides within this content attribute. So I just need to we'll paste this in here. I don't need encoding equals none, because we're just getting plain text in there. Just going to change my variable name to description. And this is the one part where it looks a little screwy, because you have this little red highlighting saying that the parser is broken or something like that. It's just because we're putting a comment inside of a quote marks, and also we have another pair of quotation marks inside of it. But have no fear, this actually doesn't cause an issue. This is the one exception where strictly defined XML. This is just something that we've coded into our into OU Campus, so this will actually still work even though it breaks what normally would be an unbreakable rule in XML, which is you can't have two quotes inside of each other. You'd have to make this like a single quote or something like that. But we don't need to in this case. We're just going to do this, and it'll still work, I promise. And the final thing that we're doing is we want to grab that default body information. So, I gave them the ability to have some body text pre-filled. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my div that's main content, which is where my body text would normally reside. I'm going to paste another echo directive in here. Once again, since we are giving users the ability to style that text with HTML formatting, we want to make sure encoding is set to none again, so we're not passing in plain text. And then I'm just going to change the echo var to body. Single Y. All right. So now we are done. We have created our echo directives. We're grabbing all of the data from the TCF and putting it where it needs to go. So I'm going to save my TMPL, go back into that folder, and now I'm just going to upload a file, which will be our image thumbnail here. So I'm going to just click and drag this file here. It's called training-tuesdays.png. I need to have it be exactly the same name as the TCF that I want it to be linked with, so I'm just going to rename it really quickly to be the exact file name, obviously different extension. So that's been nice and renamed. And just in case, you don't necessarily need to do this, but I just always like to, as a best practice, I'm just going to publish out the PNG file, just in case it needs to be drawn from production instead of staging at some point in the future. So there we go. I've got my 3 files. TCF's done, TMPL's done, image file's uploaded. All of them have the same name. We're ready to go. So now it's time to test things out. What we have to do is I'm going to go into my setup menu because I'm an administrator here, and I'm going to go to setup templates. And what I'm essentially doing here is I'm just making sure that the file that I just used is recognized by OU Campus as a valid template. So if I scroll down here, you notice that I've got trainingtuesdays.tcf. It's got our title that we added into the TCF. It's got our image in here. So we know that it works. It is here. It is listed as a template inside of OU Campus. If I wanted to, I could go and change the thumbnail URL. I can manually override this with any URL ever. And I can also change the access group here. So all I need to do from this point onwards is I'm going to place this template inside a template group and then assign that template group to a directory so I can actually see it in action. I'm just going to use my default template group that I've got here. I'm going to edit it, and I'm just going to click the checkbox here to my Training Tuesday template to add it to the list of templates available in this template group. I'll click Save. There we go. I'm going to go back to my Pages List View, get out of the Resources folder. I'm going to go back to the Training section and just make sure in Access Settings that the default template group, which has my new template, actually exists. And is the group that's applied to that directory, and it is, so that's awesome. I don't actually need to change anything, so I'm going to go inside the training section, click on the New button, and now I've got this Training Tuesday template to choose from. I'll click on that, and so now we can see that we've got some information that we can start adding. So first of all, I've got General Setup. That was my training section. I'm going to add a page title in here. Add a description. I can add some starter body text. There's my little mini WYSIWYG editor. So here we go on here. I'll just bold this so you can see that HTML formatting being added. And in my column options, you'll see that left column and right column are on right here. I can turn one of those off. I'll keep the left column on. I'll turn the right column off. And then finally, we are asking for the file name. So let's just add a new file. Training Tuesday test. And I don't need to enter in PNG because that will be, PCF, because that'll be done for me. Navigation item, that's pretty much left unchanged. Now let's click Create. And if we did everything right, it should work. Oh, now it's telling me that it is unable to retrieve the trainingtuesday.tmpl file. Uh-oh, did something wrong. So let's go back quickly. Sorry about that. I was totally expecting that to just work right off the bat. I might have misspelled Training Tuesday. So going back to my Training oh, you know what? Because I called it Training Tuesdays.tcf and .tmpl. And if we go into here, I'm trying to send it to Training Tuesday, non-plural. So that's our issue. All we need to do is have Training Tuesdays.tmpl. And then when we save and go back, now it should work. Because now it's sending data to a file that actually exists, whereas before we didn't have that. And now we can see What I added in my title works. There's my starter body content. I even have my bolding. I turn my left column on, my right column is off. And if we go into the page properties, we can see that all the same properties are still there. So we have more options that are not in the TCF. But we've got our description, we got our title. Page heading is the same as our title. Columns are on and off. Everything there is really good to go. So now we know that everything works out, and we made a functional template from an existing PCF file in our site. So with that, that pretty much wraps up what I have to show for you guys today. I know this is a slightly longer than usual Training Tuesday, but there's a lot of stuff that we had to cover today. So if there is any more final Q&A, definitely let me know. We've got a couple more minutes here. Shanaz has a question. They're asking, could you please let me know if there are any similar training materials for converting HTML files to PCF and XSL? You know, there are on our support site. They are slightly dated, I would say. They still work, but they use an older tagging method. When it comes to tagging PCFs, we used to tag them in a format that looked like comments as opposed to kind of the XML node style, which we saw today. We do have that tutorial on the support site. It's underneath the site development section. If you just search for page templating tutorial, you'll find that on the support site. I will note that we didn't really cover the XSL side of stuff today during the Training Tuesday. And the reason why is because I'm not a web developer, so I'm not super skilled in XSL, but also that takes a lot of time. If you're taking an HTML file and trying to convert it to a PCF and working it in OU Campus, what you'll need to do is you'll need to not only create that initial PCF and make sure that that's all tagged correctly with your editable regions and everything, but you'll also need to use XSL in order to actually take the data from the PCF and transform it and put it in and style it in the way that you want, and that's all done through XSL. So if you're an experienced XSL developer and you are familiar with how that works, then that's going to be a great boon to you. But if you're not very familiar with XSL, it will be very difficult to take an HTML file to a PCF. But yes, we do have some resources on the support site available for that. So you can go and look for page templating tutorial, and that should be pretty helpful for you. Okay. Well, it looks like there aren't very many other questions. If you do have one, speak now or forever hold your peace. Oh, Ryan's got a question. Oh, yeah, and there's also XSL videos on the YouTube channel. Shanaz, if you were wondering about from just a very basic standpoint of understanding how XSL works, we do have an XML and an XSL primer video on our training department's YouTube channel. So if you search for OmniUpdate Training Department on YouTube, you'll find that, and you'll see them under XSL and XML primers. They're about 45 minutes long. Our CTO kind of walks you through the basic understanding of it. Obviously, you'll need a little bit more information than just what those videos deliver, but if you're wanting to learn more about XSL just kind of at a basic standpoint, that's what we've got there. We also have a previous Training Tuesday that we did last year about table transformations that also discusses XSL. So you can go to our support site and look at that as well. And those will kind of equip you with some more tools to learn more about XSL and how it functions within OU Campus. Before we do head out, I will want to announce our next Training Tuesday. It's going to be held on the last day of May, actually, May 31st, 2016, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, just as always. We are still deciding what that topic's going to be, but as always, you can check out the OCN and support site for further details as it gets closer. And you will also want to, you'll get an email, of course, as soon as we announce the topic with the registration link, as always. So for that, that is what we've got for you today. One more question from Shanaz. They're just asking, where do I start if I want to convert an HTML file? Honestly, I guess that's a good question. There's a lot of different ways that you could start, but essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take all of the HTML that comprises your page, and you're going to take that and put it as an XSL file. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the body content. You're going to essentially isolate what parts of the HTML you want to have be editable regions, essentially. And then you're going to create a PCF file with OUC div nodes that then contain the HTML content, like your p tags, headings, images, whatever, links, all that sort of stuff, and turn that into a PCF that has those editable regions so that it can be editable in the system. And then you essentially link the XSL with the PCF and have the XSL pull in that data and put it in the appropriate places back in like the full HTML. I mean, that's a really, really, really basic, like, 3-sentence explanation if you want to convert it, but that's essentially where you need to start. You take your XSL file, or you take your HTML, download all of your CSS and JavaScripts, upload them into OU Campus, make an XSL file that contains essentially just the same HTML page, and then start siphoning off pieces of that full HTML page into a PCF file that will then contain your editable regions and things along those lines. And then if you want to get extra fancy, you can start adding parameters and having the XSL listen for those parameters and transform the page depending on what requirements are met, all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but that's why the implementation department is so good at what they do. They have tons of developers and lots of man hours spent into making that making that their living. But hopefully that gives you some basic information there. All right, folks, without further ado, thank you guys. Oh, you know what? Sorry, Eric Turner and Eric Turner came in with one more question, and he's asking, can the single-line text box be limited to a maximum number of characters? And I want to say, off the top of my head, I do not believe that is the case. I think that you can't limit it to a maximum number of characters. I will check on our support site really quick. We do have we have documentation on our TCF for every allowable attribute for variables in the TCF, and I do not believe that there's a max character count attribute for anything along those lines. So I'm like 99.9% sure that the answer is no on that, but I'll go on the support site, confirm, and I'll email you directly, Eric. So thank you guys, appreciate it, and I'll see you all next month.